So on the screen right now is a Underground Railroad sculpture in Oberlin. The term Underground Railroad originated in the 1830s and is neither underground or a railroad. Supposedly, it became from an incident in 1831 when freedom seeker Tice Davids escaped from Kentucky into Ohio. The slave catcher following him lost sight of him when he crossed the river, and it was said that it was if he had gone on an underground railroad or an underground road. The term was not common until the 1840s, and the sculpture is, of course, a symbolic representation of the term. Code words were also used on the Underground Railroad. Often railroad terms such as baggage means freedom seekers. The freedom train meant the Underground Railroad. A station was a safe house. A station master was a keeper of a safe house. And other code words were biblical in nature. So Canaan, or the Promised Land, meant Canada. Moses was Harriet Tubman, and the River Jordan was the Mississippi. So on the screen now is a map showing free and slave states as they were in 1860, right before the Civil War broke out. The Compromise of 1850 allowed California to be added as a free state and abolish slavery in Washington, D.C. But it also strengthened the Fugitive Slave Law of 1793, which required any federal official who did not arrest a freedom seeker liable to pay a fine. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 essentially repealed that compromise. It allowed slavery in Kansas and Nebraska and allowed slavery in other territories if settlers had voted upon it. The Dred Scott Supreme Court case in 1857 declared that any person that was black, free or not, if had ancestors who were slaves or were sold as slaves, was not a U.S. citizen, and that the federal government had no authority to regulate slavery in federal territories. Ohio during this time had black laws as early as 1803, which required free black people to carry a certificate such as this. So this one is not from Ohio, but is from Virginia, but it is very similar to the one that would have been carried here in Ohio. In Ohio, if a person had to be registered with the county clerk for a cost of 12.5 cents per certificate. Anybody harboring a non-registered black person was fined from $10 to $50 per offense. And anyone aiding in the escape of any uncertified black person was fined $1,000. Just for context, $10 in the 1860s would be the same as $360 today, and $1,000 is $36,000 today. So our first Lorain County connection is Norton Townsend, an Avon resident, an avid abolitionist. He worked tirelessly as an Ohio congressman to get the Ohio black laws removed in 1849. He also was a founder of the Ohio State University and huge into agriculture here in the Avon area. So this is a map of the northeast part of Ohio showing the significance of Ohio's routes on the Underground Railroad. Ohio is the shortest distance to Canada. There were no routes in slave states as the Underground Railroad was not as organized in those states because it was too dangerous. The Underground Railroad was a free states phenomenon. Freedom seekers tried to get to the Ohio River any way they could, and from there they used so-called Underground Railroad routes. Another caution here is that maps of the Underground Railroad and their routes seem to give people the impression that they were standard, dedicated routes that were traveled by hundreds of thousands of freedom seekers on a regular scheduled basis, leading them from way station to safe houses operated by mostly white conductors. It would be more accurate to say that the Underground Railroad, especially early on, was organized and operated mostly by freed northern black people, like William Still of Philadelphia. We can also say with certainty that this movement was the first instance in American history that a genuinely interracial coalition worked together for the common good.